Hi, I'm Jay Umble, and we're back for another masterclass here from Mike's Masterclasses. And this masterclass is a lot different than others that I've done. This is going to be a lot of talking, basically a lecture type format. I want to talk about a lot of things that I've run into over the years, things I think that are really helpful. Many of the things that I'm going to talk about are things that a lot of people don't talk about, and that's what I think makes this class unique, is that they're things that teachers don't usually mention, and I've never heard a lot of these. Some of these you've definitely heard of, and we'll go over and just have fun with everything. And a lot of these classes, a lot of these topics I'm going to be talking about, I wish I had known like 25 years ago, but you know how it is, it's kind of like sometimes you're just not ready to hear something. So someone will tell you something great, and it goes in one ear and out the other, and you're just not ready to hear it. So I probably wouldn't have been ready to hear a lot of these things 25 years ago anyway, but you can't help but think that on some of these things. So let's just get into some basics here to begin with. Just want to talk about professional things. So let's just talk about being professional. Number one, like arriving to the gig on time. It sounds so obvious, but I continue to run into this problem even as we speak today. I mean, somebody shows up 5 minutes before downbeat, and you're freaking out. I mean, it's 20 of the hour, and the person isn't there. The closer it gets to downbeat, you're freaking out because the person isn't there. And if they show up at 5 minutes till the hour, they have 5 minutes to get in, get parked, get in, set up. It can be problematic. So, especially if you're a sideman, the number one thing is make sure you show up with adequate time to set up. And I think it also means a matter of being respectful too to the band leader. You don't want to be constantly freaking out the band leader showing up, 2 minutes before the gig time. And it's something, like I said, that happens. It's just part of the musician's life, I guess, because we all have busy lives, and we just kind of get into things, and next thing you know, we got to, get to the gig and hustle in and play. So it does happen, but if you can, my advice is get there with a little time to spare, so you're not freaking out the band leader. Another thing to consider is the idea of being respectful of set length. I've played some clubs before where the manager says, look, we want you on exactly 1 hour and off. And they actually get upset if you play an hour and 5 minutes. I mean, they're very serious about their time. So you definitely want to be respectful of the time that's outlined by the club owner, the manager, whatever, because they have a time schedule that they want to keep consistent for their patrons and whatever. So just be respectful of that length. Okay, this segment is on preparing mentally for the gig or concert. What I think is important to do is that before, especially an important gig or a concert, is to give yourself a little bit of meditative time, quiet time, as it were. What I call centering yourself. For me, it's really necessary just to kind of focus inward and just get stable in this inward place before moving forward into the concert. You can do this if you have time at your in your apartment, at home, whatever, before you go to the gig. You can do some meditation. That's great to really settle your mind down. Sometimes that's not possible because we all have hectic lives, and we get 1,000,001 things going on in the daytime, and next thing you know, it's time to head out to the gig or concert, and we just got to go do that. But you can do this on the way to the gig, even if you've had a hectic day. I've done this many times, where especially if you're driving by yourself, to the concert, you can get into a meditative space. And what I mean by that is a place where You're just being in the moment of now. You're not thinking about the concert. You're not thinking about what you have to do tomorrow. You're not thinking about some things you did today. Try, in essence, just to still your mind down and not think of anything. And the way I do that is just concentrate on my breathing. Just follow the breath. I'm driving down the highway in this scenario, and I'm subconsciously paying attention to the highway, but I'm just concentrating on my breath going in and out of my being, just slowly and surely and steadily. And it really settles your mind down. And that's one of the biggest things, that problem areas that we have, is we have our mind chatter. You know, when you think about it, our minds are working all the time, and we're thinking about things. And it's just, you know, it's what the Eastern philosophy talks about, the monkey mind. You know, our mind is just going nuts all the time. And it's kind of like if you were in this room and there's like this like dust all over the air. You know, sometimes you see a ray of light coming in from the sun through the window, and you say, wow, I didn't realize there's all this dust flying through the air. Well, it's basically like that. Those are all your thoughts and everything. But when you meditate and become still, become quiet, that dust in the room, in your mind, starts to settle down and just really, really everything becomes clear because of that. So that's the purpose that behind the meditation, the quiet time, if you will, just to settle your mind down, just to focus in on stillness. You know, the ancients said, inaction before action, you know, and that's basically what we're talking about here. Before we act, it doesn't matter if you're going to go out and run a 5K race, or if you're going to go play a concert. It really, really helps to, first of all, become inactive. In essence, settle your mind down, relax purely in the moment of now. And then when it's time to race, or when it's time to play, we move forward with much more focused attention, and just being very effective at what we do. So it's something that I've learned to do over time. It's something that I couldn't do right away because I was too used to my mind just going every which direction. But it's something that you learn how to do. And once you get into this space and you start to understand how important this is and how much it actually can help you in performance and things like that, wow, it's like, you know what? This has to be a vital part of my preparation for a gig, a concert. All right, so here we are, next segment, dealing with preparing physically for the gig. We talked about the mental side, talk a little bit about the physical side of preparing. I never like rushing to the gig. It's one of those things that drives me nuts. Sometimes it happens, as I mentioned earlier, that, you know, we get a big day going on, there's a million things going on, and all of a sudden we got to rush to the gig. But to me, that's never been fun. You rush in, you have a couple minutes to throw your amp down, get your guitar out of the case, basically sit down or stand up, whatever you're doing, and it's downbeat, and you play. It's here again, that's everything to do with being the opposite of what I was talking earlier about centering yourself and being focused and that kind of thing. So, but it does happen. Ideally, on a standard gig, I like to get to the gig to have enough time once I'm set up to warm up for maybe 10-15 minutes at least to move the fingers, whatever. But we've all started off absolutely stone cold, no warm-ups whatsoever, and it takes you a tune or so to get into it. So that's what I like to do if possible, have a few minutes to warm up. If you're doing a serious concert, in my opinion, you should be warming up like an hour before you go on. You really want to be ready so when you come out on the stage, you're ready to play, and you can't afford to have a tune or two to warm up. I mean, people are there to hear you play. You got to be ready to go. So you can have another guitar obviously backstage an hour before. I know some guys like to warm up for an hour and a half. So it can vary from person to person, but I think that adequate warm up is definitely necessary. I think another thing that really, really helps with the physical aspect is warming your hands up. And especially if you live in the Northeast, where I'm located, you get into those colder months and your hands get cold, So I think it's really important to warm your hands up, and it seems to be really interesting that if your hands are really warm, they seem to respond much more naturally and easily to the guitar neck than sheer just doing exercises and finger movements. Warmth has a lot to do with the way it translates into your tissue and just gives you that limber aspect that you need. So I think it can even be more beneficial than doing warm-up exercises. How do you warm up your hands? You know, some guys like to go into the bathroom and they have put their hands in some warm water for 3 or 4 minutes to really let it sink in. I know that Alan Holdsworth, Jim Hall love that warm water approach. If you have a warm cup of coffee, you can clutch that, you know, while you're sitting back a few minutes before you go on, just to get some warmth happening in your hands. I know some old school guy one time was saying, hey, if there's nothing else to do, put your hands under your armpits, you know, go in a back room and just stand there for 5 minutes and warm your hands up. So the idea is that warm hands really do help you respond to the neck in a very organic way. If I'm doing exercises warming up, what I like to do is I like to run through some walking bass things with chords, you know, just to go through some sequences like that. I like to run some basic scale stuff, some arpeggios, some licks that you want to go through, whatever, just something that's working all the fingers and just is working your right hand as well, is getting a total approach together before you go on. So that's primarily what I do when I'm working the fingers, but I definitely like to warm my hands up. And I tend to have cold hands anyway, so when I get into like September through April, I definitely like to get into warming the hands up. Working with standards is fun. It is hard work, you know. But I find that once I get in, some days maybe my mind isn't quite into being, I don't know, into the standard thing. But I find that once I get into it, after I pick up my standard book and I page through it and I pick a tune, I'm working on it, in like 10 minutes, man, I'm like totally into it. It's like, this is really fun. So standards can be, you can learn, if you're spending you know, an hour a day, something like that, working with standards, it can be very beneficial. And that's something I do all the time. The way I handle that actually is, this is what I do when I'm working on standards, which really keeps me in musical shape. First thing I'll do is I'll just play through the changes, nothing fancy, just to make sure I remember how the tune goes, just the whole form of the tune. Then I'll go back and I'll play through the melody, make sure I remember the melody, you know, make sure that's intact. I'll go through and occasionally just play the guide tones of all the chords, because that's really the essence of the chord. The guide tones are the most important aspect of the chord. They're the thirds and the sevenths. They tell you whether the chord is going to be a major, minor, dominant seventh chord. So that's one of the things that's, I think, really helpful. Every jazz tune you should be able to go through and just play the guide tones of all the chords, because that's the essence of the harmony, that's the essence of the chord. Another thing that I do, well, as we talked about earlier, talking about the intros and the endings, I'll just go through those things as well, because those are the bookends for the tune, so I'll take care of that. I'll improvise a couple choruses through, keeping in touch with that aspect of standards. And another thing that I do, which I think is really fun to do, and it's a good thing because it helps with improvisation, is go through the melody and play the melody in a continuous non-stop eighth note fashion or a non-stop dotted quarter note fashion. And what happens when you do this, it automatically will take the tune over the bar line. So this is good when you're soloing. You can maybe state the melody, but you're not stating it as it's rhythmically written out for the tune. You're stating it just in continuous eighth notes or continuous dotted quarter notes, which, like I said, automatically gets polyrhythmical because you're going over the bar line. So it's a great way to create some good excitement. And it's a neat way, too, to once in a while interpret a head that way, a melody that way. So let's see, that's about everything I do for standards, but I find all those things really keep me in shape with standard tunes, and it's a good workout to do. So if you do those kinds of things, you can still learn tunes even though you're not playing 6 nights a week. You can still learn tunes. It might take a little bit longer, but you'll still learn them. Another characteristic that I notice about great players is that they have great time. One of the ways you get good with anything is you have to spend time thinking about it, you have to spend time working with it. And if you never spend time thinking about time, or you never spend time being conscious of time when you're on the gig, rehearsal, whatever, you're not thinking about time, so you're not focused on it, and chances are your time may improve, but slowly over time. So you can be much more conscious and have a time awareness about yourself when you're playing, which can help your time in general. So when you're at a rehearsal, when you're on a gig, when you're at a concert, you're playing at a concert, carry that sense of time awareness everywhere you go, so you have a sense of meter, a sense of how things are flowing, that you're not really rushing, that you're not really sliding back and slowing down. It's just something that is a habitual thing and that you can easily develop. Like I said, you just have to focus on it and be conscious every time you play about your time awareness. Another thing that pro players do is they have a strong sense of rhythmic direction. You think about all the great players, they have a very strong sense of rhythmic direction. You think about, I think of players like, Pat Metheny, I think of Coltrane, Michael Brecker, Eddie Gomez, Joey Calderazzo. All these players, they're like a train going down a track. I mean, they're just so locked in to their rhythm that nothing's going to throw them off the track. And that's developed, through lots of practice, being very clear about what your ideas are when you play them, where you're going with an idea, how you're going to resolve that intuitively, knowing how to resolve things. So that develops over time, but it's something, again, to think about, just that whole strong sense of rhythmic direction. Another thing that pro players do, which has always been a fascination to me, is that they look at the chart as being just a guide. Guitar players have a tendency to look at a chart, and I guess because we have so many things that vie for our attention, we have to worry about this fingering and this chord shape and just a myriad of things that it's so easy to become distracted. And piano players, I've noticed, naturally kind of look at a chart and it's kind of like, well, this is just a guide. I don't have to play what's written there. And for us guitar players, it's like, what? Because we're trying to get some kind of stability happening in our playing. And so when we see a C minor 7 on the page, we play C minor 7. Where a piano player might look at that and play C minor 7 flat 9, whatever. I mean, it's just nuts what a piano player will play. And they seem to do this naturally, and guitar players seem to be much slower to come about doing that type of manipulation. But it really is true, and again, like I said before, as long as you're working with your standards, you'll learn to loosen that kind of thing up and look at the chart and be so familiar with it after a while. It's like, you know what? Instead of going from here to here the way the chart says, I'm going to go from here to here, but go out like this into this chord. Totally fine. For an example, you might have on a tune like Just Friends. The chord changes to be C major, then it goes to C minor, then G major 7, then B flat minor 7, then at bar 9 it goes into A minor 7. And when you think about it, that's just one pathway of getting from here to here. So but there's other ways we can get from point A to point B, and it can be just as viable as the original set of changes. So, for instance, if I played 2 measures of C major, went into F sharp minor, to B13, go down a half step to F minor, to E, I still get down to the to the A minor. So. still get at that same destination, but it's just a totally different route. A 2-5-1, you could do the same thing with a 2-5-1 if you had a 2-5-1 in the key of G. A minor 7, D7 altered into G. We could follow that because it's in the standard chart. Or we could say, well, it's just a guide. We don't have to do that. Let's do, instead of playing a measure of A minor and a measure of D7, let's just play 2 measures of A flat, 6-9, resolve into G. A simple thing, but yet it's treating the tune differently than it's written. And so that's something that good players will do, is they'll make little variations like that and add a lot of extra life to the chart. The whole idea is to take massive amounts of information and to break it down into really small pieces of information that you can deal with very easily and make sense out of. So remember that when you get a product, don't feel so stressed out about it. And I used to do that. I used to go through a product and think, how am I ever going to get all this stuff I got? And it took me a while to realize it's not meant for me to get everything. So don't stress out about it. Go through it just point blank, bam. Whatever interests you, take that information, adopt it into your plan, and keep moving forward, and you've gained.